So we are going to talk to Eric Peterson on the program today. And before we get to that, I want to show you the site of the homeless abatement that we went to about a week and a half ago. Eric was the only other local reporter there. I thought it'd be interesting to check this site out because here you can kind of see there's empty gravel field near the UTA station where you could put tiny homes or a tent community. There's still a lot of construction going on in downtown Salt Lake City. As you can see, there's a lot of condominiums and apartments are being developed. Their developers are just trying to catch up. One of these is actually being developed by our mayor's husband. And that was considered a conflict of interest for a while because there's been a moratorium placed on housing shelters being built in Salt Lake City because there's kind of a battle going on, it seems, between Salt Lake City, Salt Lake County, and the other counties who really don't want to own up to the homeless problem that exists mostly just in downtown Salt Lake City. But now you're seeing on the screen what it looks like, exactly where the homeless camp was a week and a half ago, this empty field, and where the homeless have moved. Overhead, you can see there's a new camp right there. It's in a little tiny area. It looks like there's about maybe 30 campers. And a little bit later in the program, we're going to talk to some people who were camping, staying here in the 107-degree heat today, just sweltering heat, and with these trains going by, of course, all the time. But we're going to talk about the serial killer, basically, that's going around killing homeless people that apparently isn't being investigated, according to the woman I spoke to. And Eric's written 2 articles, one for the Salt Lake Tribune and one for City Weekly. And the one for the Salt Lake Tribune was the amount of money they are spending on these homeless abatements is enormous. It's like the number of police personnel going out to supervise these abatements is like an incredible amount of police overtime hours, and then the Salt Lake County Health Department is going out as well. Thanks for joining us on the program, Eric.
Yeah, good to be here.
So you did some grandma requests and some digging, and what did you find out? What are the numbers in terms of how much they're actually spending for these camps to get, constantly be bulldozing the homeless out?
So we really looked at we're trying to focus in on all the abatements that happened in 2021, and it's difficult to get some exact numbers on the total cost because you're looking at different government agencies that are involved. It's Salt Lake City, it's the Salt Lake County Health Department. Sometimes UDOT gets involved. If there's camps that are near like freeways, embankments, and things like that. But the conservative estimate is last year they spent over $500,000 dollars on these abatements, and the abatements being really destroying these camps, cleaning them up, and kind of pushing the homeless to some other
and that's just in terms of the city costs, not including the PD, or
that's those are kind of total costs. So and so, for example, the police department, right? The police department gets a lot of overtime hours, and we weren't able to get exact numbers, but just based on the conservative, the minimum amount of payment they would receive for something that was almost 10,000 hours of overtime work last year. I think it was just under, but that would have been $250,000 alone just for that.
Wow. And in the meantime, it's not really accomplishing anything because the homeless people really just go set up their camps someplace else immediately. Is that what you've found?
Yeah. I mean, there's shelters are at capacity. The shelters that we do have, are a lot of homeless just say that they just don't work for them. Couples don't want to be separated. People with pets, or if you've got children with maybe special needs. You might just not fit into the shelter system that we have right now. And so a lot
if you got a dog and you love your dog, I mean, supposedly they'll give you a place to put your dog for a while, but I mean that, or if you've got a spouse, I just don't see how that's viable, or you're gonna feel like you're in a good place to go, I don't know, clean up or go get a job if you're gonna be separating
Yeah.
your whole family out.
Yeah.
So
So there's a lot of it that just doesn't work for a lot of people, and so you've got hundreds of people that are outside, and they're going to stay outside, and having a camp destroyed, yeah, it's just a band-aid solution that's pretty expensive and is not solving anything really.
yeah, I've got your story up here on my screen. So the advocates say the money can be better spent. I think it absolutely could. And you also interviewed Stacy Johnson, who is the homeless camp mom, and she's got a dog, she's got a husband, she got her face all bitten up when she tried to stay at a homeless resource center. She told me, I mean, those homeless resource centers, they have this really nice look to them. They're polished, they look clean, but then everybody I've talked to who's gone into them has said they're just awful. You're constantly monitored. There's cameras everywhere. You feel like a prisoner because all your stuff is out of being checked. Do you feel like have you heard the same thing? Do you feel like those aren't working out as well as they thought they would?
I would just kind of throw out the caveat that I'm really starting to get back into researching kind of the homeless situation here in Salt Lake. This used to be something I used to cover a lot. In the last few years, I've been kind of looking at a different aspect of the same story when it comes to evictions and housing. So I'm still just beginning, I think, to kind of scratch the surface of this situation now in terms of like my investigating. But yeah, a lot of the conversations I had with homeless folks was, people felt like it was, they just didn't work. They said that it could be stressful. People had like mental health issues, anxiety. It can be a really stressful environment. There's a lot of concern about, advocates have talked to me about, that, a lot of homeless people, they get in trouble. So they kind of like cycling between, jail and prison and the street and shelters. And so sometimes there can be, a tough kind of gang presence sometimes in the shelters. So sometimes like it might not be safe for certain individuals to be at the shelter. Mm-hmm. There's
Yeah, I mean the shelter wasn't by any means perfect, but it had 1,000 beds. These homeless resource centers each have about 200 to 250 beds, and their only total capacity I think is 800. And the main problem is like the resources for the homeless are right downtown, and the homeless people want to be close to the resources. Yeah. They want to be where they can get medicine and where they can get food.
Yeah.
And like these people I talked to today, they can't even get water in their little camp without walking like 3 miles.
Yeah.
And it's just I said this has got to be insanely difficult.
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, I mean, we'd go down to the Maverick, we walk like, it's not 3 miles, it's probably 1 mile. They walk to the 400 South on-ramp where the Maverick is, and it's around the corner. But it's just in 107-degree heat to walk walk a mile to get water is just,
yeah.
I just don't know how you could do it. But I can't blame them for not being in the resource centers, because who wants to get their face bitten up by an insane person? Yeah. Like, what Stacy said, I just wouldn't know what to do. But your other story for City Weekly was about the murder of, was it just one man, or was it a couple who had been recently homeless?
Yeah, it was a man, Joe Solis, and I actually live in the Fair Park neighborhood, so I take a lot of walks around there. Like, I found a flyer about him. That's how I learned about it, and got interested in the story just because he's murdered on the Jordan River. There's every indication that if somebody knew something about his death, they were likely in the homeless community. They might have known something, seen something. And it got me thinking, like, well, what are the chances that that there's going to be a good kind of relationship enough between the homeless and the police that someone would go to the police from the homeless community with information, given how strained things are, because they see police and all they think is, oh, they're coming to destroy our camp again,
Mm-hmm.
or they're coming to see if somebody has a warrant,
Don't have the best relationship with
Yeah.
the cops.
So that kind of like got me into just discovering, that for a lot of people in these camps, they feel like they really are on their own. Like they feel like there's a lot of crime and people preying on them, and they have to like stick together in their little groups, to try and look out for each other. They don't feel like they can count on the police for their own protection. They don't feel like they have trust enough with the police, you know. Um, to perhaps like help out in certain
And they don't feel
situations.
like the police are doing anything.
Right.
I'm going to play a clip now from this woman I talked to at this camp that I showed earlier that moved just across the street from where the other camp was abated. This is Brooke. She's in a tent living here, and I'm going to quickly try to find it. Let's see. 1 second here. Where is my title card when I need to find it? Okay. So she described a serial killer, and she said something that I haven't heard before, but she said this is pretty well-known fact among the homeless population that 62 women have been murdered in the last couple of years, and their bodies have been found. Have you heard that?
Yeah, I talked to a lot of people, and I did hear really high numbers. It's something I want to look into more. I talked to a lot of people that saying, like, oh, it was like 9 or 20, or like 50, like I heard someone say as high as like 50. One of the things that it was interesting in the story I did in the City Weekly is like I kind of like asked them, is like, do you have a good like grip on how many bodies have turned up in the Jordan River to the police? And they essentially told me that like no, like they said like, well, we could find those records. You'd have to like request like every like
Yeah, they wouldn't tell me. They would have called me back. The
report.
cops.
Yeah, so it's not. Like I understand that like maybe they don't have an exact amount, but you do kind of think that like if you're like a homicide detective, like this is some like a data point you would be tracking and going, oh, another body in the Jordan River,
Yeah.
and you're I don't know.
Very
It's
strange.
possible they are, and they're just not sharing it. That is something law enforcement does. They don't want to like talk about investigations, but it did not seem clear to me that they had a ready grasp on how many bodies they found and how many were homicides versus overdoses or accidents or things like that. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of uncertainty there.
65 women's bodies.
So this is the clip of Brooke talking about these murders, and
in
here
the
she
last
is
2
now.
years, and you heard that where?
So I got the number from this year directly from someone who was being held on 27 counts of murder in the Salt Lake Metro Jail for 3 days. A few months ago, he gave me this information. He also, someone who was in there said that this man was being held on 27 counts. Well, then there were 2 more bodies recovered, so he was released. And they've been doing this, arresting the same man, and then finding more bodies and releasing him over and over, at least since last December. And they're not.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there. What she goes into is that these murders are not being investigated, that nobody's asking the cops are not asking any questions about, the people who were murdered. They just find out that there was a murder and this person who's not coming around anymore, they were killed. Is that kind of what you're learning on your end as well?
Yeah, I mean, like, especially in like talking to people about like this case of Joe Salas, that got murdered there. Joe Salas was kind of an interesting case because he was only really recently homeless. Like him and his wife had a situation like the place they're staying at, kind of was getting demolished and they rebuild, and they just couldn't get into new affordable housing. So he'd only been living on the streets a few years, but even still, so he was not quite, I think, like as in, as in deep into the homeless community perhaps as others. But, I would talk to people about that and say like, well, like have the police been coming around and like doing follow-ups? And people would say no, or people would say no, they haven't been asking any questions, or they would say, well, I don't know, because if they come, I go, I'm heading the other direction, like I'm not going to stop and have a chat with some detectives because there's no trust there,
And did you find out from SLCPD if they had done if this had been an open case that they were investigating? Or?
It's an open case, but they wouldn't discuss it with me at all.
I just can't believe it. I mean, it sounds like so much of the police resources are going into moving the homeless, not helping them, not investigating crimes that are occurring in the community. I just feel like it's just the ball's being dropped. Is that the sense you got? Like it's just there's not.
Yeah, like when I, sometimes it's hard to like know all the ins and outs, but like as a pretty interesting example, like Wendy Garvin with Unsheltered Utah, like provided me email correspondence she had with the police at one point. She was with a camp where there was a guy and he was like kind of going crazy and like threatening people with an axe and stuff, and she reached out to the police and said, hey, everybody here is on board with providing testimony, and like they want you to come pick this guy up. He's a danger. And it just ball just got dropped. They never followed up on it. Like,
really?
Like, you understand a sense, from police thinking like, well, they're never going to talk to me, so what's the point? But here was a situation where you had an intermediary, an advocate saying, look, I know all these people and they want your help.
Yeah.
And they did not get the help.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so we had Dave Drusher on the program, who's the executive director of the Other Side Academy. And his main point is you've got to hold people accountable. People who are committing crimes have to go to jail. And if that accountability is not there, then people just continue to commit crimes. They continue to be reckless and they continue to, murder. And it's like, that's what it feels like is going on right now. And so an interesting story, when I was covering just one particular homeless camp for about 3 months in the middle of winter, it was off of North Temple and about 500 West in a little park. These people hadn't experienced abatement, but one gentleman like comes into the camp and he's got a backpack on. There's some girls in the camp, and the guy who's kind of in charge of the camp, kind of a mean, tough looking dude, just says, "You get the hell out of here. You're not allowed here." And it was a pretty violent exchange, and the young guy's like, I don't have anywhere else to go, and I don't care if anybody kills me now. I don't care about my life. And he goes, I don't care either. Go. You're gonna leave. And I was like, what's that all about? Why don't you just let that guy camp here? And he says, well, because everybody knows that guy is bad news. Like he's serious criminal, and the ladies in this camp don't feel safe if we ever see him. Yeah. So it's like they know a lot more of what's going on, I think, than we give them credit for. And I think if these homicides were investigated, I feel like they'd make some traction pretty quickly. But I guess we got to ask the Salt Lake City Police what's going on. Why aren't they investigating? Did you follow up after you said you saw that email exchange? Why the police dropped the ball on that?
I did ask them for a response on that, and they didn't respond.
Just no response.
No.
All right. Well, Mike Brown, I'd love to have you on the show to explain what's going on. I'm sure you got your hands full, but it's like I'll show you the screen of Eric's story on City Weekly right now. It's called Murder on the River. Critics say a lack of trust between police and the homeless community is to blame for an unsolved homicide. And this was again with you and Bethany Rogers. Yeah, Bethany seems to be doing a lot of good stuff. So you work directly with her on both these stories?
Yeah, she was kind of more the lead on the cost of the abatements, and I was kind of support, and then I was kind of more the lead on the cold case story, and kind of helped out. So, and
it seems to me that the Tribune is doing more coverage like this, and they're supporting your organization too. Or is it vice versa? Like you're getting more funding and support for this type of investigative work?
We've with my nonprofit, the Utah Investigative Journalism Project, we've actually been pretty lucky to get some support from an organization called the economic hardship reporting project, and they gave us some really great grant funding for some of the past eviction stories we did. And so they have actually helped us too with funding for these stories as well. They're really interested in poverty issues and economic inequality and telling those stories. And so it's actually been really, really nice for us. And, and we're happy to be able to kind of do these stories, especially in different outlets where we think a story will do better, particular story, And
yeah. And so Eric's done stuff for us and City Weekly, the Tribune.
Yeah.
And I think like the quandary with local journalism these days is how do you finance it? How do you fund it? People always appreciate it when you create it, but your model is you're a nonprofit. You look for individual donations. You've got like a membership program now, and you have staff now, people helping you out, or is it mostly just you? Or
I'm still the kind of the main staff person, I guess you could say, the only really full-time employee. But we have a lot of great contributors, excellent, kind of board and advisory board, a lot of volunteer help. But yeah, it's actually been going really well. We think the model is working out. I mean, it was really, it was quite the shoestring operation, especially first 5 years or so. but putting out enough good investigative content out there, people are recognizing us and chipping in a few bucks here and there, and it's all just been adding up.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and along the lines of housing and homeless policy, you wrote about the evictions, and a lot of people are kind of getting squeezed out of the market. In what you found, is this due to landlords being greedy, or is this due to just inflation and market changes, a shortage of housing, or all of the above? What is the primary driving problem that we're facing? Why so many people are getting squeezed out of the housing market and ending up homeless?
Well, I mean, there's definitely a lot of factors going into it. Inflation, all that has an effect. On rentals and properties being built. There's definitely a greed factor. I think that's pretty clear too. And what was a big focus on a lot of the eviction reporting I did was there's also just a system built that stacks the deck heavily in favor of landlords. And a lot of the focus of that reporting was on the law offices of Kirk Collimore that do about half the evictions in the state. And Kirk Collimore's a state senator, very influential state senator, and that firm and the members of it have long been involved in writing essentially our rental laws to benefit landlords. But it's interesting. You kind of talk about why are these prices going up? As a kind of case study, I guess, a good example, I found, last year I was able to kind of access some of this data and figure out, apartment in Salt Lake City that was, for an apartment complex was receiving the most, emergency rental assistance. So there's obviously a ton of people who are in need of rental assistance. And I visited it and, discovered, there's a lot of problems, and talk to people talking about homeless people camping out in the hallways, a lot of unrepaired stuff, serious issues, crime going on there. And everyone I was talking to was saying, yeah, and they've just increased the rents on us by hundreds of dollars. And I was interesting though is, walking through the courtyard, you see there's these nice kind of I can't remember if they're ping pong tables or little barbecue areas in the common grounds. And I was well, that looks nice. But then I talk to people and they talk about their words, talking about how bad the conditions were inside, just abysmal, and so kind of tracking down who owned that apartment complex, you have to go through kind of certain layers of, the company that owns the company, and then finally getting to that company's website, and you see what they put out for investors, and they talk about a lot of our properties have this value add proposition where they basically say we're able to add some minor cosmetic improvements and then increase our rents.
Oh, really? Yeah, justify it with that new foosball table.
Yeah.
We're raising everybody's rent by $100 because we got a foosball table. Yeah, it's just crazy. We have writers who work for Utah Stories who are suffering with the rental increases, and it's like people living out of their cars in Moab we reported on, and it's like it just seems like there is a serious problem here, and it doesn't feel like it's being addressed properly. So I'm glad you're doing the coverage you are, and man, I think you just got to keep up the good work and hopefully get what's going on out there, because I think if you live more in the medium to upper class, you're not even affected by it.
Yeah. I think you're right.
So where can people learn more about what you're doing in your Utah Investigative Journalism Project?
Go visit us at utahinvestigative.org.
And you can become a member there, right?
Yeah, it's just kind of like we just kind of trying to get people to become like monthly donors. It's really kind of an honorary term, but we are kind of doing something this month. We're kind of raffling off some gift certificates and stuff for people who are like monthly donors, even if you're just signing up to give us $2 a month.
Cool. Yeah, and then links to your stories are out there, and yeah. So with that, thanks for joining us on the Utah Stories program. Our new issue called Nomads is out, available in downtown Salt Lake City. If you'd like to subscribe to the magazine, you can go visit utahstories.com, and it's $2 a month. Eric writes for us on occasion. I think we're probably going to have you in the next couple of issues, or one in the next 2-3 months. And we've got our hidden Utah issue coming up next month, and then our housing and urban development issue in October, then our history issue in November. And a lot of you become subscribers. I just want to give a shout out to all of you who did it. Paper costs have gone through the roof on us, so it's become harder to get out the magazine because gas prices went out. It's harder to print it because of paper costs. So with all you guys subscribing, we're going to keep printing, and we'll keep getting it out there. And thanks for your support. I'll see you next time.